Hi everyone, I'm Chris Higgins from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and in today's lecture I'll be talking to you about the CCBS survey. Specifically, I'll be talking to you about SurveyMonkey, which is a specific survey tool that we use here on the course. So in terms of the learning outcomes for today's lecture, by the end I'd like you to be clear about what surveys actually are in terms of being a research method for generating data, and what we are actually trying to find out through conducting the CCBS survey. Next, I'd like you to be able to identify who is your target sample for the survey. Okay, so I'll say more about this later, but suffice to say we're interested in finding C-level managers to complete the survey. Next, I'd like you to be clear about how to find, contact, and effectively communicate with these C-level managers to try and get them to take part in your survey. And finally, I'd like you to have a deeper awareness of how you're actually going to utilize all the data that you generate from these surveys in your CPs. So this is an example of maybe some of the business leaders that will be taking part, giving up their time to complete the survey. Okay? We deeply appreciate what it takes for people to do this. So again, please make sure that you communicate with them effectively and respectfully. Now, SurveyMonkey is a very important part of your group-based assessment, so it's really important that you have one or two people who are specifically dedicated to trying to find, identify, and effectively communicate with these managers to get them to take part in your survey. And hopefully that's what you guys have been doing when you think about allocating specific team roles to people. Now, of course, when it comes to SurveyMonkey, much like any other aspect of the CP, your first port of call should always be textbook. And again, there are specific chapters and subsections dedicated to every single aspect of SurveyMonkey. So once again, please check that out and please look at that first before you ask any questions about SurveyMonkey. Now, SurveyMonkey, as you can see here on the screen, does take up one specific section of your country profile, and that's the survey results and what local respondents say. So this section primarily deals with you discussing the data, discussing your findings from the survey. But please keep in mind, you will be utilizing this survey data in every other section of your CP. You'll be using it to compare and contrast with some of the literature that you cited in your CP, and you'll also be using this rich experiential data to illustrate some of the examples of business skills and practices that you're talking about theoretically in your CP. In other words, this data and the quotations that you'll use from the survey really help to bring the CP to life. It's a really important part of the CP in terms of making it feel local. So ideally down the road, we want you to use as much of those quotations as possible from your managers. Now, at this stage, you should keep in mind the survey is really about trying to generate and collect primary empirical data that you will utilize in your CP in order to understand cross-cultural business skills. So the most basic but fundamental question that we're interested in finding out here at CCBS is, what does leadership look like in your particular country? Okay? Now, in order to try and understand that, we need to think about how are we going to theorize that. So for example, is your country characterized by a strong degree of power distance, for example? Is it deeply hierarchical? Is it characterized by transactional forms of leadership? Or perhaps it's characterized by transformational forms of leadership? So these are certain concepts that you're going to apply to help understand what is going on in your specific country, and also to show the comparison between other countries that will be talked about in the CP. Now, the next question might be, well, how are we going to study that? So we'll be using a variety of different methods and tools in the module. So firstly, you'll be conducting desk-based research, which will involve engaging with previous academic literature, hopefully local scholars' work on your country. But you'll also be conducting interviews with scholars and local business experts from your country. And finally, you'll be using the survey-based tool, again, in order to generate rich and meaningful experiential data from C-level executives who've actually worked and lived and breathed business and organizations in your chosen country. Now, this is really important because unlike other modules perhaps, where you're very often just writing assessments, here at CCBS you're actually collecting and generating new primary empirical data. And this data will directly provide insight into cross-cultural business skills in different countries. It will also help to empower business leaders to find out why things are how they are in a particular country and how leadership skills and practices differ across countries. Now, in this respect, as we said before, you're also contributing to cumulative knowledge on leadership skills and practices that can directly inform scholars in the field, but also, and most importantly, help inform business leaders who are working and engaging in different countries around the world. And hopefully, your data and the insights from your surveys will help to avoid cultural misunderstandings. So, what is primary data? I've mentioned it there. Well, in essence, it's just new data that's been collected by you guys for the purposes of your CPs. Now, there are many different research methods that you can use to generate data, including interviews, experiments, ethnographies, and lots of other types. But specifically here, we're interested in the survey method. And you're going to be using the surveys to generate new primary data about your country. And for those people who are studying countries who've had no survey data about them before, you'll literally be generating brand new knowledge and insights into your country. Now, what are the benefits of primary data? What are the benefits of conducting your own empirical research as opposed to using pre-existing data? Well, on the one hand, it ensures that the targeted issues are addressed. So it helps to ensure that what you are specifically interested in examining will be examined. You're not relying on what someone else has studied previously. This means that the data interpretation and analysis that you'll do later of the survey data will also be richer because it's more specific, it's more customized, and it's more tailored to the specific country that you're looking at and more tailored to the specific things that we're interested in finding out, whether it's empathic understanding, whether it's power distance, and so on and so forth. Primary data is also really useful because it helps us gain rich, meaningful insight into people's experiences. So remember, this survey isn't with abstract people. It's with real, concrete people who are working and living and breathing in the countries that you're studying. And their insights will help to bring alive the country profile and will help readers to feel as if they themselves are working in organizations in that country. So it's really important, and they play a really vital role in terms of CCBS. And then finally, it allows for greater control. So you have greater control over all aspects of the process. So as I'll show you a little bit later on, when you get information back from your survey respondents, for those who agree to provide their contact details, you'll also be able to go back to them and ask for follow-up questions. So perhaps to address things that have been brought up in literature or brought up in your YouTube and SoundCloud interviews, you can get back to somebody to again see how that relates to their own experience. Does their experience support what you've found through other research, or does it go against it? Okay? So again, it just allows you to continually be evolving and continually be pursuing knowledge. Now, you're not just going to be collecting primary data though, because there's also, for most countries, secondary data that's available to you. And that's because here at CCBS, we've been doing this survey for a number of years now with thousands of C-level managers across the globe. So if your country has been researched before through the CCBS survey, that means that you're also able to draw upon that pre-existing data, again, to perhaps show how a country has evolved over time, or to compare and contrast previous survey findings with what you've found in this year's CCBS survey. So you'll be using a combination of primary and secondary data in the course, but ultimately you'll be presenting new knowledge and generating new interpretations and conclusions of this pre-existing data. Now, here's an example. So these are some of the countries that have been studied in previous versions of the module. And again, this is a list of the countries, and this shows you how many survey respondents have filled out surveys previously in these countries. As you can see, some countries such as St. Martin and Zimbabwe have none. Don't be disheartened. This means that you guys have a real opportunity to produce new, innovative data on countries that have previously been understudied within leadership. Okay? For those countries that do have previous work on them, this means that you're able to draw upon those survey data and to include this within your own analyses. Okay? Now, as you can see there, some countries have over 50, and that's really important because that's the gold standard here at CCBS. If you have 50 completed surveys from appropriate C-level managers, then what that means is that you can quote these as percentages in your CPs. So you could say, for example, 75% of the respondents believed that there was still gender inequality within Nigerian organizations, for example. Or 50% of people agreed that there was a high level of power distance in Papua New Guinean organizations. Okay? So there's lots of data for you guys to draw upon to make your CPs as rich as possible. So if you have that opportunity, please take it up. It only serves to strengthen and reinforce the arguments and conclusions that you're making in your CPs. Now, at this stage, it's really important to think, what actually is survey research? I've mentioned it a few times now in this lesson. Well, surveys are perhaps the most commonly used form of data collection in the social sciences. And there's multiple methods, in a way, through which survey data can be collected, including face-to-face interviews, telephone surveys, postal self-administered questionnaires, but also, and most importantly for our purposes, online surveys. Okay? So you'll be using a particular questionnaire, a questionnaire that's already been designed by us at CCBS to make sure that the questionnaires are standardized. You'll be using this questionnaire in order to collect data from your survey respondents. So as I say, it's a form of data collection. Typically it generates quantitative data, okay, from a set of variables from responses to a series of questions. And when it comes to analyzing that data, very often you're talking about the prevalence of a particular issue. So for example, what percentage of leaders report being close to their staff, for example. Now remember, once you get over 50 respondents, then it means you can start talking about prevalence in terms of percentages. 75%, 50%, 25%. And this really allows you to compare different cases. Now, the types of questions that will be asked on the CCBS survey, they're a mixture of closed questions, structured questions, which follow either a yes-no answer format or also a Likert scale format. And then there are also open-ended questions. And what these open-ended questions do is it allows the survey respondent to go into a little bit more detail to reflect upon their own experience, their own insights, which are really gold for us. Because what this means is that you can use those open-ended answer responses and you can try and use them as quotations in your CPs. So we'd like you to try and get permission from your respondents of whether you can name them or not. But even if they want to remain anonymous, you can nevertheless still use the answers that they provide in these open answered questions and incorporate them into your CP. You can synthesize them with previous survey results or with the academic research that you're citing in your CPs as well. Now, here's some examples I just want to show you of particular questions from the CCBS survey and how this looks when you're analysing it. So this comes from Team Belgium from last year. So the question is, a manager might confront team members, subordinates during a staff meeting if it is necessary to obtain targeted results. And you can see here the Likert scale. It's a 6-point Likert scale ranging from not at all like me to very much like me. And what the guys have done here at Team Belgium is they've broken this down into percentages. Now, as you might see here, they're using decimal points. When it comes to actually including these percentages within your CP, what we'd like is for you just to tidy these up a little bit and round them up. So rather than saying 10.81%, just say 10% of participants, for example. Rather than saying 21.62%, just say a fifth of participants agreed with the statement that X, Y, Z. Okay? And it's really useful to use a Likert scale like this because it means that you can convert these into binaries. So for example, you can connect the answers 4 to 6, for example, and have these relate to a high level of agreement. Or similarly, you can connect together answers 1 to 3, and that could mean a low level of agreement with a particular statement. So this is another example that comes from Team Belgium last year. And the question here is, when a management decision has been made, it will not be changed very easily. And again, you'll see they have the 6-point Likert scale and the percentages for the respondents who answered in relation to that particular question. So again, you can see already the sorts of things that we're interested in, the sorts of concepts, the sorts of ideas, business skills and practices we're interested in finding out. And the surveys are a really important way of getting that data from real people. Now, as I've said already, the gold standard we're looking for here is 50 valid respondents. And by valid, we mean real people, ideally. And also, we are referring to people who are specifically C-level managers and above. So I'll mention who they are in a little moment. So this will require you guys hunting for professionals, hunting through social networks, also perhaps using your pre-existing networks in order to gather and collect as many people as possible. So remember, the more people you can get for the survey, the more valid leaders you can get to complete the survey, the better it is for your team and the better your mark is going to be. Now remember, here at CCBS, we've thought of everything, so we're not expecting you guys to make up everything on your own. Rather, there's dozens and dozens of templates that you can use in order to structure your communication with these business leaders, whether it be via email, whether it be via LinkedIn, whether it be over the telephone. All we ask that you do is that you customize it and tailor it and tweak some of these templates to fit the country that you're studying, okay? And all of these materials, as I'll show in a moment, can be found on OneDrive in the Download SurveyMonkey Tools folder. So there's lots of information there already. Some information from previous years also that you guys can utilize to help produce the best possible survey results. Now, at the moment, you might be thinking about, okay, well, who is our sample going to be? So obviously, we're really wanting you to try and find people who are working in the country that you are studying, in the country that you're investigating, or at least perhaps have worked there for a significant period of time, 10 years, 15 years, etc. Okay? So the first thing this relates to is sampling, because obviously you can't interview or you can't survey every single business leader who works in that particular country. So rather, we want you to try and develop a kind of target population, if you will. So you need to try and define who it is in that population that you're specifically interested in speaking to, okay? So here at CCBS, we use non-probability sampling. And what we mean by that is we're not just kind of asking anybody or the most convenient people. Rather, we're very clear about who we're looking for. So in that respect, it's purposive sampling. We have a very clear idea of the target group that we're trying to speak to and gain insight and data from. Now, another way in which you could look at this in terms of sampling technique is that it's a snowball sample. So ideally, when you contact one professional who agrees to take part in your survey, they might also agree to pass that survey on to other business leaders who they know. And that's an example of snowball sampling. You can help to build up your numbers that way. So what is our specific sample then? So we are interested in gaining insight from C-level leaders specifically. So who and what are C-level executives? Well, C-level executives play a strategic role within organizations. They often hold senior positions and they implement company-wide decisions. And an easy way of thinking about C-level manager is that it tends to be titles that have C in the title. So for example, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Human Resources Officer, and so on and so forth. So again, this is the gold standard. These are the people that we're looking for. People who are movers and shakers within an organization, who manage teams of employees and adopt different leadership skills and practices. We're interested in trying to gain as much insight from their wealth of knowledge and experience of business practices in the country that you're studying. So, how can you identify these people? Well, Sander's put together some really nice information that will help you track your SuMo sources via LinkedIn. So these are some hacks and other hints and tips that you can use to find out the contact details of business professionals in the country you're studying. So LinkedIn is one of the primary ways of doing this, of course. So on the OneDrive, you will see that there are templates for how to communicate with people via LinkedIn. Remember, LinkedIn has a minimum amount of characters that you're able to use in order to communicate with people. So I'll show you an example from Team Barbados in a little moment. I'll use an example of one of their templates for communicating on LinkedIn. So this is a hack from Xander. So if you perhaps pause the video at this point, you'll be able to read through this particular hack and see how you can use it in order to basically find thousands of information from people on LinkedIn. So I think this is probably quasi-legal, I think, as Xander would probably say. So again, please keep that in mind. Please be discreet about how you communicate with people after you've found their details using this particular hack. But nevertheless, it really points towards how you need to be inventive, you need to be hungry, and you need to be creative if you're going to get the number of survey respondents that you need to push your team over the edge, get the best possible data that you can, and produce the best possible CP and become published authors by being included in the book at the end. You've really got to go for it. So again, if you're thinking about which member of your team you want to allocate this role to, you want it to be someone who's fearless, who's relentless, who doesn't take no for an answer, and will continue to push and hunt and find as many C-level managers as possible to complete the survey. That's the kind of person you want on your team. Now, in order to verify the particular searches that you're doing and who you're contacting and how you're communicating with them, what we'd like you to do is to use print screens of your mails and chats with people. And this is also really useful because, again, it can be used as templates for future versions of the module. So future students can learn from the hints and techniques, the forms of communication that you've used in order to identify people. We've also would like you to produce an Excel list, such as the one here. So this is from Team Bahamas last year. And again, as you'll see in some of your OneDrive folders, some of you will actually have these Excel sheets that have been produced by previous teams who've been studying your country. So this means that you've already got a head start in terms of contact details that are there. Now, bearing in mind, if someone has completed the survey before, you might not want to bother them again. But if somebody didn't do it last year, you might want to get in touch with them this year. Perhaps they have more time and availability to complete it for you. But again, we'd like you to do something similar. So much like finding literature, we want you to be systematic in your approach. So we want you to try and get as many of these contact details as possible using the LinkedIn hacks that Sanders made available to you. Now, this is a survey link, but what I want to stress and make very clear at this point is that the survey is not open yet. So you will not be able to access the survey until you get the official go-ahead from Xander, okay? So there's no need to worry about that aspect of things at the moment. What you need to be focusing your time on is trying to identify in advance as many of these respondents as you possibly can. And when the time is right, and when Xander and I feel like your team is ready, then we will make that link available to you, okay? Now, there's two versions of the link, and again, this is very important and everybody needs to really pay attention to this part. So, yes, you will be able to share the green version of the link that will be made available to you in order to invite potential respondents to complete the survey online in their own time. But never, ever, ever share the red link, okay? And the red link is the direct access to all the data analyses, okay? So that cannot be shared with anyone else. That is specifically for us. So, to reiterate, the green link is good, and we'll tell you when your team gets the go and when you're able to send that. The red link, you can never send. That's purely for our private use. And again, all the details about this are in the specific textbook chapters on how to see answers in SuMo and how to analyze SuMo results. So please read through your textbook and get more details about everything I'm talking about here. So here's what the survey looks like. This is just an example of the first page. And as you can see, the person just makes a declaration that they will complete this questionnaire from the perspective of, and then they choose the country that they are going to be providing the perspective on. That then starts the survey process. Now, please keep in mind, unfortunately, I know everyone can sometimes be too creative and too inventive in the methods that they use in order to generate data through surveys. But please keep in mind, we are trying to produce ultimately data which is reliable, which is valid, and which is informing, directly informing business practices and scholars in the field of leadership. So we really want to stress to people that you cannot invent the data, okay? We're not interested in made-up invented data. And we will be using a series of IP analyses to make sure that the survey data is being completed by professionals in the specific country that you are studying. So if we see that an IP address is coming from somewhere other than the country that you are studying, we will be getting in touch with you and ask you to explain why that is. But in all honesty, it's a very serious issue, guys. So please don't try and get it around us, because it won't work, okay? Now, as I've already mentioned, it's really important that you check out OneDrive in your team folders, because there's a whole folder dedicated to SurveyMonkey. Lots of tools, lots of tips, lots of templates for how to write LinkedIn invitation letters, how to write follow-up letters thanking people for taking part, And reminder letters, because keep in mind, very often C-level managers are incredibly busy and important people, so sometimes you will have to send gentle reminders to perhaps ask them to fill out the survey, or to ask if they need any help from you in completing the survey. Perhaps something is unclear to them and you can help to clarify that issue with them. All of these templates are available on OneDrive. This is an example of the folder here. As you can see at the top, SurveyMonkey Tools. Click on that and have a look in your own time. Now, what's also important is that the survey is about collecting these insights and experiences from researchers, from professionals in the field, sorry. So using open-ended questions and also using Likert scale answers, okay? But at the end, what you can also ask is for the person to provide either their email address or their phone number to you. And what this does is it gives you the opportunity to call them back if you found that their data was particularly interesting, and you have the opportunity to ask them some follow-up questions. So again, you might find that you found previous studies have found a particular issue that you think is interesting, and you want to speak to the specific professional to see if this resonates with their own experience of conducting business in that country. So again, it's an evolving project, the survey data, but if you get agreement from the C-level manager, then you're able to speak to them later to keep adding to that rich bed of data. Now, I just want to conclude this lesson by showing you some examples of previous templates of teams who are trying to invite respondents on LinkedIn or via email and so forth. So this is a standardized template. Again, this is available on OneDrive. So you can read through that in your own time, perhaps by pausing the video. But I just want to show some specific examples from Team Bahamas, which I thought were a particular best practice example of how to effectively and politely communicate with people who are giving up their time in order to complete a survey and help us here at CCBS. So again, it's really useful to perhaps pause the video at this point and have a read through these letters and see what the guys do really well. What I particularly like about these examples is they are polite, they're to the point, and they also make an effort to kind of butter up the respondent, if you will. Remember, it's always a good idea in life to really emphasize how impressive the person is that you're getting in contact with, why their experience and their extensive knowledge is of use to us here at CCBS. It really helps to make people feel special and probably makes them feel more inclined to want to complete your survey. So here are some other examples of the second email, for example, again, that you can use in order to thank people for having agreed to take part in the study and communicating to them that you'll be passing on the link to them shortly and how they will complete the survey and so forth. And also it helps to really emphasize again what their data is going to contribute to. And perhaps it's always a nice idea to say that you'll send them a free copy of the book at the end as well for having taken part. Now, remember, it's really important that you follow all this advice to the letter and really get someone and allocate 1 or 2 people in your team to really focus on the SurveyMonkey element of the CP, because once again, it forms part of the criteria for how we assess your work. So again, as you can see on the 2 slides here, it's really important that you're systematic in your approach, that you follow all the advice and procedures that we give you in terms of taking print screens of your communication, in terms of developing an Excel sheet with all the contact details and so forth, making sure that who you are contacting are valid C-level managers, making sure that the people you are contacting have worked or are working for businesses and organizations in your specific country. Remember, if we scan for IP addresses and we find out that that isn't the case, that's not going to work well for your team. So please make sure that you're critically evaluating the people who are completing your surveys, okay? If we deem that they're not valid, then that data will simply be deleted by us, okay? So it's really important that from this moment on, you dedicate yourselves to trying to find as many respondents as possible. The more you get, the better your CPs are going to be, okay? Now, with that, good luck finding and identifying people, and I'll see you all in class next week. Thank you.